Good morning, everyone. This is our first public evidence session as part of our inquiry looking at Burma and Bangladesh, but starting with the Rohingya crisis situation. We have two panels today. Our first panel will be for 50 minutes and then the second panel for 40 minutes. Can I welcome our panellists? The usual custom and practice is we go straight into the questions, but when you first answer a question, please feel free to introduce yourself with some relevant background. And let me start with a general opening question to each of you. How has the Rohingya situation arisen and been allowed to persist? And what would it have taken to lay the foundations of resolution? And I think I'll just go across the panels to start with David.
Happy to open. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm David Meffam. I'm the UK Director of Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch has been working on Burma for probably getting on for 20 years. We've obviously followed the Rohingya situation incredibly closely, but we've worked on other issues in the country as well. We've been on the ground really since the start of the current crisis at the end of August. We've had people sort of interviewing and getting testimony from the people going across the border from Burma into Bangladesh, and they've painted a very, very grim and disturbing picture. And I think the short answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, is in terms of the immediate crisis, is what we've had from the Burmese military is an unprecedentedly brutal, cruel, vicious counterinsurgency, clearance, security operation, whatever we choose to call it, which has really had as its aim and intention to move as many Rohingya out of the country and into Bangladesh as possible. On the basis of terror and fear. That's what's been used. They've used tactics of terror and fear. We have a report coming out this Thursday about sexual violence and mass rape, which is really, really horrific in terms of the testimony we've established. But this is one feature of an overall policy of terror that's been used by the Burmese military to move the Rohingya out. You asked, in your question, you were asking about the kind of the longer context. Clearly, what's happened since August the 25th hasn't come out of nowhere. There have been many, many instances in recent years that we and others have documented of violence against the Rohingya. The Rohingya faced decades of persecution and discrimination. Committee members are aware of the 1982 citizenship law that effectively denies citizenship to the Rohingya. So this story goes back a long way. It's about a group of people who have, I think at one point were described by the UN as the most persecuted ethnic minority in the world. They have faced decades of discrimination and repression, and until that is addressed through serious policy on the part of the Burmese government, supported by the international community, these kinds of crises are probably likely to recur.
And Human Rights Watch in 2013 published a report saying that there was ethnic cleansing then.
Indeed.
Do you think if action had been taken then we might be in a different situation now?
Absolutely. I think consistently the international community has failed to take adequately strong steps to address what's been going on, and that happened back in 2013. It's still happening today, to be honest. I mean, there's huge international media attention and political attention in terms of what's happening. But I think we would argue, perhaps others would argue on this panel, that not enough concerted pressure is being exerted on the Burmese military to address what's going on and to address their culpability for these crimes that they're committing.
Thank you. Champa.
Hi, I'm Champa Patel. I'm the head of Asia for Chatham House, but formerly the Director for South Asia, Southeast Asia with Amnesty International. So just to add briefly to what David's saying, what we're looking at is a situation that's the culmination of successive decades of systemic persecution and discrimination, where even before the 1982 citizenship law, you see rights being eroded in the time preceding that. I think there's an important cultural dimension to this. So I think I'm hoping today, while we discuss political solutions and humanitarian responses, we also look at the cultural dimension, because legal pathways to citizenship aren't going to resolve the problem that there's long-standing cultural discrimination against the Rohingya. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Tun, welcome.
I'm Tunkin, leading Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK, and Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK is highlighting the plight of Rohingya in international arena. And as a Rohingya, what I have seen, is systematic plan to wipe out the whole Rohingya population, even though, my grandfather was a parliamentary secretary during democratic period time of Burma. I am not a citizen of Burma. Wow. It's systematically, they put a law, 1982 citizenship law, denying the citizenship, and the way what I have faced restriction of movement, marriage, education, that's what I have seen when I was in Arkhana state. So what we have seen is this is the, long-time systematic plan. They are getting out of Arkhana state of the whole Rohingya population. So it's intentionally Burmese government wiping out the population or the Rohingya community from Burma. As far as what I heard recently from Bangladesh, I was there for last 4 weeks ago, and they told me they have seen systematically Rohingya houses been burning down, village by village, house to house, and systematically rape Rohingya women, and also children thrown to the fire. That's what I heard from Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So this is clearly Burmese government systematically doing to wipe out population.
Mark.
I'm from Burma Campaign UK. Our organisation was founded in 1991 in response to calls from within Burma, including Aung San Suu Kyi, for international support to promote human rights and democracy in Burma. I've been at Burma Campaign UK myself almost 20 years now. I'm currently banned from entering the country by Aung San Suu Kyi's government because of being quite outspoken in criticism over the human rights crisis there. I think it's really important to understand that what has happened in Burma is a decades-long policy of trying to drive the Rohingya out through twin tracks of human rights violations and deliberate impoverishment. And that this was escalated from 2012. We had the military-backed government that took power in 2011, facing elections coming up with Aung San Suu Kyi likely to win a landslide, trying to whip up Buddhist nationalism and using the Rohingya in particular as a target to build support. And they systematically escalated repression against the Rohingya, and every single time the international community backed down. We've made a written submission to the Foreign Affairs Committee which goes into this in much greater detail. I won't take up your time now going into detail on that, but it's not just that we allowed what happened in 2012 to happen and a whole series of other steps, the census, the elections to happen, but we allowed the similar sort of attacks to take place against other ethnic groups in the country for decades as well, when there were numerous reports from human rights organisations, the United Nations and others, that violations of international law. So there's consistent impunity been allowed to happen, which is why the military think that they can get away with what they're doing. And in particular, in October last year, when there were smaller scale attacks, we saw a very muted response at the same time as Min Aung Hlai's soldiers were attacking Rohingya, using rape as a weapon of war. Min Aung Hlaing was invited to Europe. He was speaking to the heads of EU militaries at a prestigious meeting in Brussels. He was later invited to Italy, to Germany, to Austria, taking in tours of weapons factories. So he learned that he could carry out these violations with impunity then. There was no consequences for him. He saw that he was more popular within the country after these attacks last October, and he, probably a surprise to him as it was to us, Aung San Suu Kyi launched a vociferous defence of the military, denying human rights violations were taking place, and acted as a lightning rod. So it appears that he learnt these three things then, that the next time there was an ARSA attack, and we all knew there was going to be one, nothing was taken in preparation of this, but we all knew it was coming. We put out a media release a week before these attacks took place, calling on the British government to take this to the Security Council, to warn the government and the military not to do what they did. But no action was taken. We all knew this was coming. And he learnt these lessons then, and he sent in troops from a crack division, Light Infantry Division 33, 2 weeks before these attacks took place. He was waiting. They had a plan in place to implement this. But it's that consistent failure of failing to act when he was attacking the Kachin, the Shan, the Karen, the Karenni, other ethnic groups, failing to act in 2012, failing to act in October 2016, that has given him the confidence that he could carry out this campaign and get away with it. And so far he is.
Paul, did you want to briefly add, David? Of course, yeah, of course.
Which follows on from what Mark has said. I think it's very timely for the committee if you haven't already seen it, but the Burmese military put out a report just yesterday. It was produced by a so-called army investigation team, but they were describing what had happened since the end of August. And they said that, quote, there were no deaths of innocent people in the context of the current operation. So I think it kind of reinforces Mark's point that the Burmese military consistently are denying that these extraordinary abuses that they are responsible for are just not happening. They're sort of living in some delusional world. Actually, delusional is too generous to them because they know exactly what they're doing, but they consistently lie about what's happening.
Paul?
Yeah, I might come back to that in a second if I can. But why do you think, following on from what Mark was saying, why do you think there's such a large number of Burmese population that are actually behind what's going on, their attitude towards the Rohingya, pushing them out? What's driving that?
Yeah, I think the one thing we should be clear on is the mood and tone within Myanmar is so different to how the rest of the world sees this situation. the majority Burman population support the actions that are being taken because they don't see the Rohingya as part of Myanmar. They see them as outsiders, they refer to them as Bengali immigrants, that they are not part of the fabric of Myanmar life. They've never been. They're interlopers. They should return to where they come from. So a lot of, in terms of understanding the political response, whether it's the military or the civilian government, is to understand that the population itself is not necessarily against these measures. So there's a huge, overwhelming support. Messages of the sort that I think the international community or outside observers would find really difficult to read in terms of how the Rohingya are referred to. But there is wide population support for this within the country.
I should have actually probably declared of interest that I'm the Prime Minister's Trade Envoy for Burma and also the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group. So following on from that, do you think that the population, and maybe we'll talk about Aung San Suu Kyi, I'm sure, later, but do you think the population are fully aware of the actual violent acts, that, rather than just, if they're behind them driving them out of the country, that's bad enough. But if you're talking about the violent acts and some of the mutilation, burning, etc., how aware do you think the wider populace are?
But you have a Ministry of Information that will say some of these reports are fake news, that pump out alternative information for the population. But I think you have to understand this in a context of decades of people being told that these people are outsiders. So it's not that will pierce through. Hearing these stories won't necessarily pierce through to how people perceive the Rohingya within Myanmar. So I think one is the historical discrimination against this group that's been perceived as outsiders. Two is you have an active Ministry of Information that's pushing out information that contradicts or countenances what international human rights organizations are documenting on the ground. So I think a combination of those two things mean that it's easy for the Burman population to say, well, outsiders don't understand what's going on. They don't really understand the country. These people don't really belong here anyway.
Thank you. Finally, for me, the official line would be that they're responding to terrorist attacks from ARSA. There's been, they will talk about drug smuggling, they'll talk about the possibility of infiltration of extreme terrorism. Can you just give us a sense of, if that is the case, what the scale is, how big ARSA is and the size of any infiltration?
Well, it's going to be a lot bigger now, following these attacks. I've spoken to some officials from regional governments since these attacks took place. Their main concern is not the human rights violations, it's whether these new camps will be a breeding ground for terrorism. I mean, most of the reports about ARSA indicate that there might be a small core group and they've been trying to mobilise villagers who are unarmed. The reports were of villagers attacking the police stations with sharpened bicycle spokes and sticks and told to shout loudly to scare the soldiers away so they could try and find the guns that they would leave behind. I think it's been made a much bigger thing than it actually is by the Burmese government for their own propaganda purposes. But I think it's going against their own interests. I think they've unleashed now, when you see the statements from some of the extremist organisations, they've unleashed something now. I don't think they have any clue what's going to come because of this. They've really put themselves in the spotlight and as a target now and made their own population more vulnerable through their actions.
ARSA's goals were mainly nationalistic. They want the Rohingya to be recognised. I think the risk now is whether they invite it or not, the risk of transnational Islamic recruitment, radicalisation. Whether that's wanted or not, that may be a consequence of where we are now. But they were a small group, poorly armed, didn't necessarily have widespread support within the Rohingya community. There's some links that have been illustrated by organisations like International Crisis Group that show some links with Saudi funders, Saudi backers, etc., but very tenuous links. So in that sense, a largely nationalistic group with Islamic characteristics now could become more of a threat because of the current situation.
Paulie.
And when I was in Bangladesh, I was able to ask Rohingya refugees about ARSA, and many Rohingya elders, they told me these are young guys, particularly joined there, who were where they are sister being raped by Burmese military, and Rohingya young guys who were not allowed to get married for 3 years, and they couldn't get married because they didn't get permission for 2 to 3 years. They can't wait, and the life being destroyed. And some Rohingya youth who passed matriculation, they couldn't go to the university, and some guys, their land, their father's land been taken away by the Burmese military, and they've been displaced in Arakan state. So those are a kind of a group of people. That's the way they say. They have no choice. That's the thing. That's what they told me, in my opinion.
Thank you. Pauline?
Yeah, I think maybe my question has been answered, but I'll ask it anyway. Do any of you see any signs that the crisis is now easing? And are the Rohingya people still being attacked and leaving Burma?
Yes. I heard a lot about yesterday about 1 p.m. I got some videos that Rohingya house has been burned by Rakhine mob, which has been supported by military. And every day Rohingya house has been burned down by Rakhine mobs. And one guy told me from Buthidown Township, when I called him, he saw many Rakhine mobbers getting out of the military camps, and they go to Rohingya villages and they just burn Rohingya houses. They lit fire and they took away, they looted Rohingyas, everything, motorcycles, what you have. And we have seen a picture also the day before yesterday. They load in all the Rohingya motorcycles and all the Rohingya properties they put in a lorry, and some Rohingya took pictures. So every day they taking and looting and burning down Rohingya houses, not like before, whole villages, but 5 houses, 7 houses, 10 houses, continuously burning down. And Rohingyas being arrested by every day. You are ARSA member and they asking for extortion. Whoever Rohingya own the shops and these things in market, they go there and they taking away everything. They say you are ARSA member, you will be arrested. And then when he arrested, they asked for money, like a kind of worth in like 20 lakh, which is like $2,000 around, and that's going on. Whoever have everything, they are taking away. That is the situation. No safety, and Rakhine mob come, they burn down and they loot. When they try to argue, they just kill them. This is systematically going on every day, Buthidown, Maunda, Buthidown Township. And that's why the people are fleeing. On top of that, there is no safety, no security. So that's when I ask some people, why you are fleeing? Your houses not being burned. No, Rakhine mob come in and they looting every day our properties. And the military come to our place and they threatening me. Why you guys are still here? This is not your land. Your land is Bangladesh. Everybody gone already. Why you guys are still here? If you want to be killed, you leave this place. Otherwise, you get out of here. That is the way the message is spreading up everywhere. So people been fear and they don't care anything, whatever they have, and that's the way the people are fleeing. And the thing is, when I met some Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, someone like who owned like a value of 100,000 pound land, he given up, he left everything, he gone away. And I asked him, why you leave? He said, there's no choice. My life is at risk. That is everyone told me when I was in Bangladesh. So it's continuously going on until today.
Very quickly reinforce that. Just a very quick point. I mean, I agree with what's been said. I don't think the scale of atrocities are what they were in sort of September, but I think you're absolutely right. Evidence suggests that they continue to be committed. We've done a tally. You may have seen the Human Rights Watch has done this work with, and Amnesty and others have done similar stuff too, looking at satellite imagery to look at patterns of arson. And our latest estimate is that 288 villages have been destroyed totally or in part since the end of August, and tens of thousands of homes, so the homes that people live in, tens of thousands have been destroyed. So there's a kind of ongoing tally of destruction and arson and crimes that continue to be committed. And of course, going back to your original question, the overall crisis in terms of the numbers of people who are now in Bangladesh who need to be addressed, that still is very, very far from being resolved in any way.
And obviously the monsoon is coming to an end. Is anybody expecting a mass exodus come the monsoon, and are the local, the international community nearby ready for that? And how sympathetic are places like Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia to the fleeing Rohingya people?
Well, in the last 4 days, so from the 9th to the 13th of November, 4,000 people crossed the border, a land border. As the monsoon ends and sailing season starts, you are going to see people leaving increasingly by ships. We've seen this before in the May 2015 crisis. The response within the region is wholly inadequate. So at APEC, leaders of Asian nations didn't say anything, didn't tackle this head on, which is interesting given that quite a few countries in the region are affected by this. So I think Indonesia has been, trying to play a role behind the scenes. They sent their Vice Foreign Minister Masudi to Myanmar. So they're trying to do background diplomacy in order to try and find a resolution. But nobody is welcoming of the Rohingyas. Malaysia, for all its rhetoric, the more must be done, doesn't actually accept them and treat them fairly when they are there. So I think there's a concern here that you will see greater outflow of people using sea routes, but the response that you're going to get from Southeast Asian nations, if it's anything like what they've done previously, will be inadequate to the scale of the problem, but ultimately it doesn't solve the root causes of this problem. So it will keep happening again and again. We will continue to see ongoing displacement until people deal with the fact that this is a group of people who are stateless. And until that is dealt with, there will be continuing attacks, people will continue to leave, and it will just be a cycle that goes on and on.
Thanks, Pauline. Nigel, and then we'll
Thank
come
you, Chairman. Mark, I was quite taken by your answer to the Chairman's first question when you referenced Aung San Suu Kyi's government banning you from going into Burma. That suggests to me that you believe that she herself is complicit in what is going on. Have I got that right?
Well, her government reviewed the visa blacklist after taking power twice. They've announced 2 reviews so far. Whether it was her government that put me on or it was Thein Sein's government that put me on, I don't know. But her government has decided on 2 occasions now to review the list and to keep me on. It is indicative of a broader problem that has emerged since Aung San Suu Kyi's government took power, which is she does have authoritarian tendencies. We have seen restrictions on freedom of expression, increased restrictions on media. We've seen the continued arrest of activists and journalists, which she can't control because she doesn't control the police. But she has decided not to repeal the repressive laws that are used to jail them.
Yeah, but most people think that she's a prisoner within her own country, that it's the military that dictate, and if she stepped out of line, she'd find herself back in house arrest. I mean, she's got near heroin status when she came to visit this country a few years ago.
Yes.
Are you now telling us we got it completely wrong, and that actually she is now part of the problem that exists in Burma?
On several issues, yes, she's part of the problem. A lot of the international community would also say that, in a lot of issues, she's also the best hope and possible solution compared to other leaders in the country. But yeah, she has kept political prisoners in jail. So she doesn't have the power to stop the police arresting political prisoners. She has the power to release them. She's chosen to keep a lot of people in jail, including a 14-year-old child that was recently jailed after being arrested by the Burmese army. So it's something we are going to have to come to terms with, is as well as the fact that we have the military controlling part of the government, the freedom that she does have to operate. She can release political prisoners after they've been imprisoned. She's choosing not to. She can repeal repressive laws. So she has powers to improve human rights that she is not using. And I think the idea of this military coup threat is talked up a lot. It's a very convenient excuse for her party to hide behind and the international community to hide behind as an excuse for doing nothing. We have produced a detailed briefing on this coup threat myth, but the military, they designed the current political system and it's worked very well for them. They've got sanctions lifted, they've got international acceptance, they've been receiving training from governments all over the world. Yeah. Their budget went up by roughly $100 million a year during the reforms that under Thein Sein.
If we've got any influence with our government at all, I would think it's through Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yes.
She's been to our parliament. She was given an amazing honour in being allowed to address both houses in Westminster Hall, which is never given to somebody who's not the immediate head of state. And so I'm going to be a bit more direct with you on this, because of the appalling atrocities that are taking place there, and we're horrified to see it on a daily basis. Are you saying that she herself is complicit in what is going on?
Yes, I'm afraid that she is complicit. Aung San Suu Kyi kept in place military-era restrictions on aid to the Rohingya IDPs in camps that killed children. Right. So that's if she was not restricted by the constitution or the military from lifting those restrictions. She chose to do that. She's kept in place military-era laws and is still her government is still using them to restrict freedom of expression.
Well, can I open it up to everyone else, because we're trying to find out a solution to this and where we've got influence. And if we can't have influence with Aung San Suu Kyi, I mean, I'm just wondering whether the heck we can have influence.
I think I'm not saying we can't have influence with her. I think the approach so far has been very uncritical, that she's the only game in town, and to give her uncritical support. I think that needs to be reviewed. We need to look again at the kind of support we're giving to her government. You know, she has denied and defended this military operation of ethnic cleansing. She is violating other human rights in the country. And so, yes, we need to see reforms work in the country, but perhaps we need to reevaluate the kind of support we're giving and be willing to be more critical and apply pressure perhaps in certain places when it's needed. And so far, the international community has not been willing to do that, and it has hidden behind this military coup threat myth as an excuse for not doing that.
Anybody else want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember in domestic politics of Myanmar, the military have 25% of all seats and control the key interior ministries around defence, home affairs, etc. So in that respect, the focus on her means that nobody's talking about Min Aung Hlaing, Commander-in-Chief, responsible for the army, responsible for the military operations, and ultimately the person who is most senior, who knows about these things and signs off on them. So I think the focus on her is warranted, but not to the exclusion of other people who should be held responsible for their actions. In terms of the British role in influencing, I think, and maybe there may be a difference of view here, the answers lie in the region. Right. It's getting key players like India and China to play a role. It's finding a regional solution with ASEAN countries, and for Britain to use its role to support the humanitarian operations, use its position on the UNSC to push for political solutions, but I don't think it has the sort of direct influence that countries like India and China will have on Myanmar. It's a different power game in the region, in my view.
Do any of the panel members disagree with that?
I do disagree. I mean, we've just seen...
Let's let David say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. By the way, I agree with the comments and the criticisms that have been made of Aung San Suu Kyi. We don't need to repeat that. I agree with what the two colleagues on the panel have said on that. But I also agree with Champa that actually we should be focusing a lot more attention and focus on the military.
Yeah.
If you look at the current crisis and the 600,000 people that have gone across the border into Bangladesh, this is a military operation. And the guys that made the decisions to do that were the senior people in the military, and that's where our criticism should really be focused. In terms of what... I mean, obviously, ideally one wants a regional solution. I don't disagree with Champa on that. Regional solutions would be ideal, but I think Britain has a role to play on this. Traditionally, it's been the penholder at the UN Security Council. It's had a couple of closed meetings that it's convened in recent weeks. It had one open meeting which led to the presidential statement. I regret, we regret that the British government has not been more assertive and not been more effective in pushing this agenda forward. And there may be various reasons for that. But if I'm thinking back to sort of previous sort of human rights and humanitarian crises in the past, I think Britain would have sort of got the countries lined up, and there would have been more oomph and more direction and more push behind an international settlement. And this seems a bit ragged, and there doesn't seem to be that kind of focus that is warranted given the severity of what's going on.
Thank you. Chris, then Lloyd.
Sorry.
We're going to run out of time, and we've slightly gone out of order on questions. So I'm going to go to Chris and then to Lloyd.
Yeah, just on that note, what exactly or what precisely would you like to see the British government doing now?
So I think one is the humanitarian response plan that's needed to support people is only 30% funded. So international condemnation isn't going to save lives, but putting money in aid of what's needed will. So I think one is to use British influence to ensure that the humanitarian support plan is funded. I think two, to use its influence and the spaces it has, for example, the UNSC, to convene countries that can influence. So to use its influence in power, its convening power to bring together the right stakeholders, have the closed-door discussions in order to push for a political solution. So I do think I think Britain has a role to play. I think the responses, the solutions lie in the region, just to clarify. Thanks. But I think Britain has a role to play.
Lloyd.
I think...
Sorry, I need to take more questions, or we're not going to be able to complete all our questions. Lloyd.
I know Human Rights Watch has called maybe for a referral to the ICC via the Security Council. Is that something that other members of the panel share that would be useful for Britain to do? Because we would have to do it through the Security Council because Burma's not a member directly. So only action through the Security Council could happen. Would that help?
Absolutely.
And who should it target? Just Aung San Suu Kyi, or should other people be named in there.
Mark.
Well, if there's a referral, then it will be up to the investigators to follow the evidence and decide who should be charged, if anybody. I think the key thing, the British government has been saying, we've been calling them as well to support a UN-mandated global arms embargo, targeted economic and financial sanctions. But as other people on the panel say, it has to be focused on the military. We don't want to see blanket sanctions on the government or things that affect the ordinary population, but we do need to apply pressure on the military, not just because of what they've done to the Rohingya, but what they're doing to other ethnic groups. They're the main obstacle to democratic reform in the country. They're still violating human rights by arresting people and restricting freedom of expression. So we need a whole way. There's no single thing that is going to pressure the military. What we need to do is just keep adding straws to the camel's back.
Thank you. You've mentioned sanctions, and I'm going to come to Virendra's question next, and I'll come to you first on it, Tun, but let's get Virendra ask the question.
Thank you very much. I think they're partly all the questions are touched. I put it straight. There's the three questions, so that you can decide which way you want to answer. Should sanctions be applied against Burma? Should defeat programs in Burma be suspended? Was it correct for the UK to suspend military training? These are my three questions.
Do you want us to answer them? Or?
You take it as
yes, very, very quickly. We think that the sanctions were lifted far too early, back in 2012, and that targeted sanctions against senior people in the military should be reimposed, and there should be serious discussion about that, and the British government ought to be having that discussion. I don't think DFID should suspend its programmes, but I think DFID should look very closely at its existing programmes to see whether, to some extent, it's reinforcing the kind of authoritarianism and the rights abuses of the military, and if it is in any way, they should stop. So there should be kind of a review of its policy. And the military training, yes, I think it should stop.
But there's specific work is done on parliamentary strengthening. Do you think it's right that that's still going on, that there are still British programmes there?
I think that's the kind of thing that should be looked at in the current context. I think given the gravity of what is happening, 600,000 people, thousands of people dead, mass rape, I think that's the kind of thing that should be looked at in the context of an overall review of DFID's policy towards Burma.
Thank you very much. Tun, do you?
Yeah, firstly, I should say, apart from that question, British government have to continue UN Security Council to do because we have seen presidential statement is not actually that much effective. Though we need to call for a stronger resolution from UN Security Council, and also referring to ICC, and also calling UN mandated global arms embargo with targeted sanction. On top of that, there is no safety, security, any mechanism to protect the Rohingya people in our kind of state. That is immediately needed also. And also in Bangladesh, when we talk about Rohingya refugees repatriation, there can be with Bangladesh and Burma, that is international community must involve on that, because when it's been happened last time also 1917, 1991, 92, unless there is no policy towards Rohingya change in Burma, these people should not be repatriated from Bangladesh, and we have to look at that seriously. And when we talk about I think we need to focus on much stronger punishment to this military. This been impunity going on many decades, and this going on against Rohingya many times now. That we have seen 2016 October after, and also this time. And same time, when we talk about Aung San Suu Kyi, that she's totally complicit, I should say. As a Rohingya, we've been supported her for many years. As myself and our organization, I campaigned for her release in this building many times. So this is what she's not speaking up, and it's not she's speaking up, she's totally denying what's happening against Rohingya. We have seen Amnesty International stronger report, Human Rights Watch report, and our UN report is much mentioned what's amount to crime against humanity. Her office is denying fake rape, fake news, continuously going on. And when we have seen UNSC statement, her office, State Consular office, is saying this is still, something. She's just trying to get away with the Rohingya issue. We have seen also when she visited recently, she put in the other way, diverting the issue, where Rohingyas are, I should say, as facing genocide, and she is putting that is a kind of quarrel, or that the other way she is putting away. So it shouldn't be that way. She is totally complicit on this point.
We're going to return to that issue of genocide in a moment. Champa.
No, I just wanted to respond to say whether it's sanctions, referral to the ICC, visa bans, global arms bans, none of this is going to happen unless China signs on. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, and there is no international agreed consensus on a political solution or roadmap for peace. So I think these things are all possible. We should push for all of these things. But the elephant in the room is China, and China's not going to sign on to a UNSC resolution condemning Myanmar. It's going to block any ICC referral. Myanmar's not going to self-refer itself, which is another way to do this, and it's not going to sign on to global bans. So I think there's much more work to be done to get consensus on what a roadmap to peace looks like, that China will sign on to in order to open up some of these avenues. Pursuing accountability is important, but dealing with the current crisis and thinking long-term needs to happen in parallel tracks as well.
Mark?
I think there's still value in the British government publicly saying it supports the principle of a UN-mandated global arms embargo.
Yep.
There's value in saying it supports the principle of a ICC referral, because it puts political pressure. Some of these sanctions will have limited economic impact, but they all have significant political pressure. It puts the focus on the military. It puts pressure on them. They've really enjoyed the benefits they've had since the reform process. They don't want to start losing them. Yeah. If they're subject to visa bans and others, it's going to have an impact on them. But like I say, it needs a combination of everything, and it needs to be done at once, because what we saw in the last series of sanctions that happened since the 1990s was a gradual increase in sanctions as a slap on the wrist when an atrocity occurred, rather than being systematically applied in support of diplomatic and other initiatives. It needs to be done much more sensibly this time.
Thank you. Virendra, did you want to come back?
Just very quickly, maybe not directly related to my question, it was previous questions, that when India threatening to send 40,000 people back, don't you think it weakened the situation in that region? And what should be done to activate the political campaign in that region?
But India has hosted Rohingya refugees for a long, long time. So when it threatened to, on the one hand, it's saying to Myanmar, you're absolutely right in what you're doing. These terrorists shouldn't be allowed to be in the country. You know what? We're going to deport 40,000 people. But where? They're stateless. So where are you going to deport them to? So I think that was India pandering to a domestic audience. Most of the Rohingya settled in Jammu and Kashmir. So it's pandering to a domestic audience that has concerns about Islamist extremism within the country. I don't think it was necessarily playing to a regional audience.
Champa, where is that now? The last I knew, the court had...
The court is still considering it.
The court's still considering, right?
But ultimately, the question of deport them to where? So I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it was domestic pandering rather than... But what India is doing behind the scenes is more important. Providing aid to the Bangladeshis, working more closely with the Chinese than people would think. So I think in that respect, the diplomatic role it's playing behind the scenes is where we should focus our energies, not often on the public rhetoric that bears no reality to its action.
David, and then James has a question.
Could I make a quick point on accountability before we move on to other topics? I mean, I think on the ICC, we all know that's going to be enormously complicated for the reasons that people have said, but I think it sends a signal, as Mark has said. But I think there is an opportunity for progress for DFID and for the British government in terms of accountability on crimes of sexual violence. And I think that ought to be a real priority. And we've documented appalling rape and mass rape that's taken place over the last couple of months. We've got a report coming out on Thursday, which I'll share with the committee. The British government has said consistently since William Hague's time that tackling sexual violence and conflict is a priority. DFID has committed some, I was looking at their website and their recent statements, they've committed some money to this area, which is important and welcome. But I think given what we know about sexual violence and the tendency of women that have experienced the trauma and the horror of all of that to under-report or not to report, there's probably a huge problem of we know there is a huge problem of sexual violence in the camps when people are arriving in Bangladesh. The services are not there in sufficient number, and we're not doing enough to actually talk to women in privacy and with confidentiality to establish what happened to them, to create a basis at some future point for prosecution. So there's the service issue, which is critically important, that people have the health services and the psychosocial support that they need, having gone through the extraordinary trauma of rape. And some women have been raped and gang raped and have walked for a week with their other young children. I mean, it's unbelievable what people have experienced. But the issue of getting people held to account for those awful crimes, I think, is critical. And I think DFID and the FCO and the British government, having made so much of this issue rightly, you could ask them some tough questions when the ministers come before you about whether that's really being taken forward.
Thanks, David. James.
On Sky News at the moment, 5 of the top stories are on the Rohingya. One is on the sexual violence issue. We've heard a lot about sexual violence of people perpetrated in Burma, in the camps, but they're reporting that you can buy a girl for £5, not for sex once, but that is actually purchasing that individual for the longer term to use as a prostitute under modern slavery. Is that really what is going on? I mean, it's totally horrific.
I mean, others might want to comment. I mean, what we know from IDP camps and camps around the world is that women and girls are incredibly vulnerable in those situations. So sex trafficking and sexual slavery of the kind you've described, and prostitution and people being trafficked, all that happens. So another thing that I think is relevant to what DFID, the British government, is doing in terms of these camps is, are they doing enough to make those camps secure? I mean, actually, it sounds very mundane, but is there adequate lighting? Are there guards? Do women and children feel safe in those camps? And I think the answer at the moment is no.
Yeah.
And that's a really important issue, a practical issue to address too.
And we're taking evidence next week from the Minister, and we'll be putting these points absolutely. Now, we've got 10 minutes and 2 more questions. I'm going to go to Richard now.
Thanks. You've mentioned the possibility of referral to the ICC, and I'd just like to ask you a few questions about how you think the international community should formally categorise what is happening there at the moment. First question is, you categorise it as ethnic cleansing?
Yes or no? Yes.
Yes.
I assume that is the case.
Yes.
Do you take from that that it is therefore prima facie a crime against humanity? And how would you respond to those people that are saying it should actually be formally categorised as genocide?
Well, I think in international law, the acts that we've seen, certainly on the evidence that's been seen, it's both crimes against humanity and could be said to be genocide. So there's no hierarchy here in law. These are equivalent acts. So I think certainly what we're hearing is, the distinction between crimes against humanity is that it affects a large number of people, and genocide that it's aimed at the destruction of an entire group. And certainly the evidence that organisations have documented show acts that are constitutive of both. I think a thorough investigation has to then establish which label they want to take forward. But in a way, it isn't like one is worse than the other. So I think it's important to be clear in law, whether it's crimes against humanity or genocide, the accountability should be pursued, and it's for the investigators to determine then, based on the evidence, which of these apply.
I do agree. I think what we've come up against recently, and we saw with Sky News yesterday, where they had a detailed reports and they questioned the Foreign Office Minister Mark Field about whether it's ethnic cleansing or genocide. And then you end up discussing what to call it instead of what you're going to do about it. So they didn't ask him, why aren't you supporting ICC referral? Why aren't you supporting targeted sanctions? Why aren't you supporting a UN-mandated global arms embargo? They asked him what he was going to call it. And that lets him off the hook. And I think, we know that there's violations of international law. That requires an international response, whether it's genocide, ethnic cleansing, or crimes against humanity.
And does it affect what the international community's obligations are, according to what it is called?
There's an obligation to act on crimes against humanity, as with genocide.
Okay. David, any thoughts on that one?
Well, just to add to that, I mean, we haven't called it genocide, just for the purpose of clarity. We've called it crimes against humanity. We haven't used the genocide word, partly because we're very cautious about doing that, and we want to have enough access to information to make that kind of determination. So up to this point, we haven't made that determination. But in a way, I agree with Mark that we can get hung up on arguing about crimes against humanity or genocide, whereas actually what we all know is that appalling crimes have been committed and continue to be committed. And the big question for the international community is, what the hell are they doing about it? And not enough is the answer. So, come back to your question, no, I think that there has been a slowness and an inadequateness to the British and the wider international response that we need to expose, and your committee can question them about. I don't think enough is being done to address the gravity of the crimes that are unfolding in Bangladesh and in Burma.
But there are different things, right? The UN Charter enshrines the duties to ensure peace and security. The ICC, or calling it crimes against humanity or genocide, are pathways to accountability. So I think the duty to act isn't contingent on what we choose to call it. In law, there's a duty to act anyway in the interests of peace and security.
Okay. And finally, just in terms of numbers, I mean, you've referred to thousands having been killed. do we have any clear estimates about the amount of people who've actually been killed, and who's actually putting that evidence together? Because that presumably could be important down the line in terms of ensuring accountability.
It's very hard to get the numbers. I mean, we have said thousands. We think that's the best estimate from what we've seen and what we've seen unfolding, but it's very hard to get the numbers, and it's critically important that someone somewhere should make more of an effort to do that. And I think that's part of the accountability conversation we were just having, trying to establish how many people have been killed. And men, women and children have been hacked to death and killed and raped. And we need to know that. And we need to know who was responsible. And we need to have some proper accountability for that. I mean, just to take one case, which I don't know whether people saw BBC Newsnight last night, but if you didn't, I really recommend you watching Gabriel Gatehouse's piece on the Tola Tuli massacre, where we've done some work. We've got a report coming out in a couple of weeks. We think several hundred people were killed in that massacre on one day in northern Rakhine State. So I think the numbers of thousands is perfectly plausible and feasible. But you're right, we need to get to the truth about the numbers, and it's part of the accountability effort, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult, of course, because the Burmese government doesn't allow any access. So there's probably awful ongoing things happening in Rakhine State that we can't get to, including the humanitarian situation of the Rohingya that are still left there, actually without any humanitarian assistance.
As far as when I met Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh last 4 weeks ago, I met Tola Tuli, the village, some villagers from there who were escaped from the massacre. And some people are saying more than 1,000 even in one village there they've been killed, because when I asked them how can you say it's 1,000, because they say whoever remained in around that village, they all been already there in the camps. Whoever arrived, they've been contact, and the people and who are missing, their main is being killed because that is military, totally deployed on that place, and many military arrive and they kill and slaughtered, and they taken away their babies and thrown to the fire. It's totally horrible, horrific situation, that village. And we have another few villages in Butidang, Mongnu village, they slaughter hundreds of Rohingyas. That's the villages they told me. And some people seen with their own eyes. And also Godam village in Butidang, there's also hundreds of people been slaughtered and shot dead and killed, even including children. So from those a few villages, we have seen, more than thousands over, So it's very hard to verify how many people have been killed, but it's quite a lot, I should say. That's the way what I heard from the Rohingya refugees.
Final question from Chris.
Question really, just want to go back quickly to Aung San Suu Kyi. I think it was yourself, Marcus, said she's also seen as a possible part of the solution. She recently visited Rakhine province and has raised some hopes regarding return of refugees. Yes. What I really want to ask is it possible for refugees to return to Burma? And if so, how would they do that? And what part can Aung San Suu Kyi play in that respect? That's for all the panel, by the way.
It's simply not possible for Rohingya refugees to return. Aung San Suu Kyi's visit was, in fact, when I travelled with Ivan Lewis to Burma in 2012, it was one of the things that we were asking her then is, will you go? And she refused, and she's consistently refused to go when ministers and others have asked her to go for years now. I think a month ago we saw a shift in tone from her, a shift in approach. We had her advisors briefing behind the scenes, and it seems like she's getting some sort of alternative public relations advice now, and we've seen a change in tone, but we haven't seen a change in policy. We haven't seen a change from denial. We haven't seen a change from the policies of repression against the Rohingya. So we're still seeing the military operating there. Even if Aung San Suu Kyi did do what the international community wanted, she doesn't control the military. She can't guarantee that there won't be another ARSA attack next month, and it's going to come. There's going to be another ARSA attack, and there's going to be another military response. This is inevitable, and she can't protect anyone who returns. She doesn't have that power. But I think she does in the country. She has so much love and support from people, and she's not as hindered by the nationalism as people say. She won that landslide election victory, even when nationalists were saying don't vote for, Buddhist nationalists were saying don't vote for her. And so the biggest tragedy here is she's probably the one person in the country who really could start to change the culture and attitudes towards the Rohingya. And she's chosen not to do that. She's chosen to take the opposite path, and actually has been her government recently has been actually whipping up more hatred and tensions via their social media and state media posts. But any Rohingya who do return now will return to an insecure place where they are still stateless, where they don't have citizenship, where they don't have any rights. They're likely to put in prison camps, which is where the Rohingya from the violence in 2012 are still living, with severe restrictions on humanitarian assistance, so that you have very high levels of malnutrition, children denied education, mothers dying during childbirth, all unnecessarily. So that's the fate that they face if they do return. It's madness to be talking about return and welcoming her moves to talk about return in the current environment.
Very quick supplementary from Paul.
Just very quickly, can one of you give sort of 30 seconds on the extent of the landmines on the border and why they're there?
It's not an area that I've worked on extensively, but there's certainly evidence, I think, documented by organisations that show there have been landmines placed by the military along the border to deter return. What I would say is return has to be voluntary, free and fair. And I think we cannot ask stateless people to go back to the ongoing situation of statelessness. So I think, political solutions have to be talked about here, because returning to what? An ongoing situation where you don't belong is not a long-term way forward, but on landmines.
I'll send you something.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to your reports, David. But can I thank all four of you for giving us evidence today, and please feel free to stay in the gallery for the evidence that we're going to take with the second panel. It's very, very valuable and extremely important, and our intention is to publish a report on this as soon as we possibly can. So thank you. If I could invite the second panel to come to the table. Thank you very much. Panel of witnesses. We have about 40 minutes, and we have 9 areas ideally that we're seeking to cover, so we're going to have to be fairly quick going through the questions. James.
Very broad question. Could you just update us as to the situation in Rohingya state, and specifically what intelligence do we have there? Are there UN operatives able to get there? Any aid community reaching out within that area, providing evidence of what's happening?
In Rakhine, yeah.
In Rakhine, sorry, Sorry, thank you very much.
Lovely. And as with the previous panel, please introduce yourself when you first answer the question. Daphne, do you want to give the first answer?
Yes, thank you. I'm Daphne Jersinger from the International Rescue Committee. We have resumed our access to our pre-existing sites in Rakhine State with limited authorisation to operate again. We're a little bit concerned about the authorisation and the extent to which we have access, in that it's a long bureaucratic process. We have access to the pre-existing sites for the next 2 months for national and in some cases international staff to operate. And we have applied for increased access to additional villages in northern Rakhine State so we can assess the situation and the needs there.
Matthew Saltmarsh from UNHCR, the refugee agency. At the moment, we do not have access to provide humanitarian assistance in Rakhine State. We do have international staff there, we do have local staff there, but they are confined to their offices and to their bases by the local authorities. We are calling for unfettered humanitarian access, but as of yet, that hasn't been provided to us. We do understand that a few other partners, the ICRC, including the ICRC and the WFP, have been able to get very limited access to certain areas, but as I said, that is extremely limited, and so that's our situation in Rakhine State at the moment.
Again, I'm Ian White with World Vision UK. We're a child-focused agency, working mainly in relief development. We've been in Bangladesh since 1972 and in Burma since 1991. Again, as it's been said earlier, we don't have any access into northern Rakhine State, so it's very difficult to sort of say what is happening. But I am aware of what has been said already, that there are agencies who are doing some limited work, but we are strongly advocating for open and free access for agencies to go in and actually help those who are in most in need within Northern Rakhine State.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Nigel.
Well, what's going on is clearly appalling, and hundreds of thousands have now gone into Bangladesh. Could you say anything about the support that the Rohingya are getting in Bangladesh?
Sure, perhaps I can start with that one. So I think you're probably aware of the numbers. The latest figure, there's 615,000 refugees have crossed over into Bangladesh. It's been declared a level 3 emergency, which is the highest UN emergency. That 615,000 is in addition to 307,000 who were already in that part of Bangladesh. The international humanitarian support is being led by a structure called the ISCG, which is currently headed by the IOM. And underneath that, the different UN agencies and NGOs and partners are working based partly and primarily on their expertise in cluster groups, for example, health, food, protection, and so on. UNHCR has been leading one of those subgroups, which is the protection area, and one of the initial focuses for us was, of course, on registration and counting. And we've almost finished our first family counting exercise, which was going out through the refugee settlements and counting the families and actually getting detailed information from them and being able to input that into databases and then using that information to provide assistance and aid for the entire ISCG community. And we've got some, just in the last few days, we've got the first initial results from that family counting exercise, which tell us, and that covered 137,000 families, so somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 individuals, that 54% of the refugee population is under 18, 3% of them are unaccompanied or separated children, 14% are single female-headed households, 30 to 35% of them have vulnerability needs. In other words, they're old or they have a family member who's disabled or who has severe medical needs. 52% of the population female. The peak arrival period was in September when 72% of the current residents arrived, and 70% of them came from Muangdor Township. So they were primarily coming from one particular area. So that exercise has basically tagged and got information from the refugees who are currently resident there, and that information is now collated in a database which is run by UNHCR and which is available to the entire humanitarian
These
community.
are colossal figures. And in the camps that they're living in Bangladesh, are they truly safe?
I think the answer has to be no. I mean, it's still early in this displacement crisis. In the early days of these situations, the structures are just going up. There is obviously a certain amount of chaos and of bedding down of systems, of putting infrastructure in. The security is run by the Bangladeshi authorities, who obviously are doing their best to put up checkpoints and to police the system. And the humanitarian partners are also doing what they can to assist with infrastructure, putting in lighting, to add extra staff, to get those staff to stay longer, to get female staff in particular who can work with children and female-headed households. And so the situation, I think, is better than it was, but to say that it's safe, no, it's not.
And this question's a bit later on, yes.
The funding aspects of all of this, it always seems to me that there are so many of the pressures on UN budgets, and there's got to be on yours too. Are you completely underfunded and overwhelmed by this crisis?
UNHCR's own appeal is currently 54% funded, and you'll have seen that there was a pledging conference at the end of October which garnered 340 million of an appeal for 440 million or so. But that appeal just runs through to February for the immediate humanitarian response plan. So beyond February, there'll have to be more appeals, much more fundraising. And so, yeah, we are underfunded. But that was a positive response, I think, from the Geneva Pledging Conference.
Richard?
Yes, just returning to the counting exercise that you're doing. obviously it would be quite important, particularly in terms of accountability down the line, to relate numbers fleeing Rakhine State to those people who have died, numbers of people who've died or gone missing. I wonder if there's any mechanism to try to do that. Has there been any involvement, for example, of the International Commission for Missing Persons, who've done quite a lot of that kind of work in Bosnia and elsewhere? Are they involved at all?
We haven't got numbers of those who have died or are missing in Rakhine State. We haven't been able to do that. We don't have the staff or the access to do that. I don't know if any of the other panel have.
Yeah. I think similarly as commented by the earlier panel, I think that there are a number of challenges in assessing that, and that's what we have.
Pauline. Sorry.
I was just going to add some things on the numbers side of it, because from our side, we are child focused, so it's very important for us. But we're finding that around about 60% of the latest arrivals are actually children. And we are estimating from various sources that there is between 1,200 and 1,800 a day that are coming across. This is where that is going down a little bit, but we're talking about 12,000 children a week who are going across the border into the camps. So there is a very large number. Can I just briefly go back on the protection side? And I would definitely say the answer is no. We've been gathering some quotes and things from different things, and one of some incidents where children have been trafficked, and one comment was, we left Burma to keep our children safe from violence, but now we feel more vulnerable.
We'll return to that in a moment. Pauline.
Yes, one of the questions I want to ask is, what is the main reason that the people you've spoken to in Bangladesh have given for leaving Burma, and what percentage of them want to return? I mean, is it violence and attack, is it hunger, is it rape, or what else?
We have received a number of reports of violence that have been experienced. There are, in our assessment, we've identified a number of a high need for treatment of gunshot wounds. We have surveyed in our multi-sector assessment, the population survey, the respondents was around 11% who said they'd want to return. So that would be an indication of people's views.
Anybody else want to add to that?
From us, it would be very similar. It's based on reports of rape, of shooting, of villages being burned down, of abuse, being forced to leave, to flee for their lives with nothing more than the clothes that they're wearing. We don't have specific numbers on those who would wish to return, but we have heard reports that some do wish to return, surprisingly perhaps so soon after such a trauma, but some do.
Yeah, and UNHCR assisted 230,000 Rohingya to be repatriated to Burma before, and there has been criticism. What lessons has the organisation learnt from that experience, and what monitoring has there been of what's happened to those 230,000?
That's correct.
In the 90s, wasn't it? In the 1990s.
That's correct. That was in the early to mid-1990s. Yeah. So I think our view on returns, first of all, would be that, of course, returns should only take place when they're able to do so in safety and in dignity, and with the consent of those who are returning, obviously. During the 1990s, it's true that we did assist with returns, and those were done on the results of bilateral agreements with the two countries, with Bangladesh and with Myanmar, MOUs that were signed, and certain conditions agreed to. Now, ultimately, over the course of time, the Myanmar authorities did not provide a state solution, citizenship, to many of to all of those returnees, and hence that was one of the fundamental conditions for the return that was in fact not ultimately adhered to. We have recently had conversations with both countries involved about potential returns, and there was a ministerial workshop was held in late October in Myanmar with the two countries. Again, it was stressed that any tripartite agreements would have to be voluntary and done in dignity and safety, and to places of origin or places of choice of those returning. I think the other point to make is that there is a process, the Rakhine Advisory Commission process, which you'll all be familiar with, the final report of which came out in late August, around exactly the same time that the first wave of major displacement was occurring. And we believe, and I think many of our partners believe, that that does offer a credible roadmap towards potential return if the main planks of that agreement are adhered to, and that would involve particularly a solution in terms of citizenship, but also it goes down to other aspects like economic, giving land to returnees and to Rohingya populations, and resource sharing with central government. So I think we believe that there is the potential there for agreements that could pave the way for returns, but of course they would have to be adhered to.
And what about monitoring of those that went back before?
In terms of voluntary returns?
Yeah. Was there any, I mean, do you know what happened to them?
What recent voluntary returns?
No, the ones that you sent in the 1990s, the 230,000 that were repatriated. Was there any monitoring of what happened to them, whether they're still there, whether they fled again?
In terms of specific detail, no. I mean, some of them will presumably have been displaced again. Some of them may still be there. There is still a population there in Rakhine State, but in terms of specific monitoring, no.
Thanks, Paul. James.
Can I ask about the organisation of the camps in Bangladesh, the degree to which the Bangladeshi government are organising? In particular, ask UNHCR why it's the international organisation of migration that's leading rather than UNHCR and OCHA supporting. So I'm not quite sure what the structure is and whether it's adequate and fit for purpose.
So the IOM was already in place as the lead international UN agency, and the decision was taken in conjunction with the government of Bangladesh that arrangement would continue given the immediate urgency and the crisis situation. Of course, traditionally UNHCR would lead in a refugee situation, and if you look at the situation in Syria, OCHA is the lead agency within the country, and UNHCR is the lead agency in the neighbouring countries, which are hosting 5 million plus Syrian refugees. So I think there is a case to look again at the structure and the expertise in place, and to ask whether this could be improved. But I think the focus until now has been very much on working within the current structure and getting in as much aid and resources as is possible.
It seems very sensible for an outsider. There seem to be 3 acronyms working for one acronym. The UN are all doing the same job in different countries. Is that just a broader problem with the UN organisation rather than, I don't want to be sidetracked?
Well, we do have specific expertise. So UNHCR, the refugee agency, IOM with a focus on migration, and OCHA on immediate humanitarian coordination. But of course, if you look at a crisis like, for example, the Mediterranean crossings from Syria, it's a mixed migration crisis where refugees and migrants are crossing together. And so, of course, the 2 agencies, IOM and UNHCR, are having to coordinate much more closely to help to manage those mixed migration situations.
Can I just say a little bit about camps? So I was in Bangladesh in September, so was able to see the sort of diversity of camps and arrangements for people who were just setting up home where they could. I mean, there are still people arriving who are just seeking shelter wherever they can outdoors, who don't have a tent to speak of, but where they can set up camps in either spontaneous sites or in the new site that's been provided by the government of Bangladesh, which is 3,000 acres, which is approximately 2,000 football pitches, if you can imagine that. There's a really grave need for proper coordination and organisation and camp management, and we're deeply concerned about that. Currently, there are a cluster of services in the centre of the camp which people would have to walk approximately 45 to 60 minutes in the blazing sun, in very muddy conditions, sometimes with all of their children, to get essential services. So as you can imagine, camp management and appropriate coordination is vital in this context where things are changing at a very fast pace every day.
In a moment, some more detailed questions about life in the camps. But great, thanks. Virendra.
Thank you. Chair, I just declared that I just come back from Bangladesh over the weekend, so I have visited Cox's Bazar and a couple of other places and witnessed the situation you just mentioned. So I still have the question, which I think you may add, that is, what account is being taken of the possibility or the likelihood that these camps for the Rohingyas in Bangladesh are going to be long-lived? Mm-hmm. And if you at the same time touch, what are the main problems in the camps?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question because currently the nature of the shelter provided is very temporary, and given everything you've heard today, we can anticipate that this is likely to become a protracted crisis and therefore needs to be dealt with as such. Currently, the problems with shelter are that they are usually plastic tarpaulin, as you will have seen, and bamboo shelter, so very temporary structures. What is more, they're put up in conditions, particularly in the 3,000-acre site that I mentioned, which are unsuitable, which are prone to landslides, likely, particularly when cyclones come, and which are certainly insecure. The sites that I saw, they didn't have sort of walls to speak of or shelters to speak of. They were completely exposed. As you can imagine, this increases the vulnerability of particularly vulnerable populations. And just adding to the point that was made earlier about whether people feel safe, the women and girls that we speak to don't feel safe enough to use the latrines even in the daytime. So their vulnerability and security is very, very compromised. With regards to the problems this creates, I mean, it creates the problems that I mentioned about the distances that need to be travelled, but it also creates problems in the long term in terms of access to services. So if we are considering this to be a protracted crisis, then it's essential that we start to be thinking about self-reliance and sufficiency of the populations, that they have a realistic prospect of livelihoods and education. We know that of the people surveyed in our needs assessment, 90% of them would send their children to school if they could. And so people are thinking in the long term, and so that's an important question.
Yeah, again, sort of from our perspective, one of the key things is to make sure that the environment becomes a safe environment for children, and that the children have access either to preschool education or especially having access to a space where they can be a child, have fun, but have a space where they can also share and let out some of the expressions of what they've been through, because all of these children have been traumatised in different ways. And for us, it's important that they have that space where they can actually express themselves. For the older children, it's essential that an education programme is set up within the camps. To go with no education system,
I'm going to come back to a question on education a little later. So.
Perhaps just to add a line on will the camps be long-lived? I mean, traditionally there would be just really three solutions to refugee crises, which would be integration, onward movement or resettlement, and return home. And at the moment, integration is clearly not an option with the Bangladeshi hosts. We've just spoken about returns. It's something that is being talked about, but it's an extremely difficult situation. And I understand from your earlier panel, you talked about the regional situation, which is also complicated. So, I mean, we can't say whether they'll be long-lived or not. It's impossible to speculate on that, but of course, all of the international actors are working for a solution, but within those three areas, it's very difficult, and there are serious constraints within that. And then just on the camps, I think, and there's not really much more to add, you've heard a lot of the figures. We have a lot of data on the requirements for the different sectors, food, health, education, and so on. I won't go through them now because you can get them online from the Intersector Coordination Group and the Humanitarian Relief Plan. All the numbers are there, but obviously the needs are absolutely enormous.
Thank you.
The next question, which is after visiting there, talking to people, some research done, whether the refugees would like to go back or not, the fear. Are there steps that can or should be taken now to improve provisions for these refugees over the longer term? Though you touched it, but I think it's more in depth into that what can be done for the longer term when the large number of refugees has indicated that they won't go back.
Well, I would probably go back to the answer I gave on the commission, the Kofi Annan Commission, which we think offers a roadmap and a blueprint towards a possible solution. The international community has endorsed that as a possible solution, and even within Myanmar there have been positive noises about that. Whether that is actually translated into action is a different question. So the possible solutions for the longer term are there. It's a question of the Myanmar government now stepping up and taking action that can facilitate a longer term solution, i.e. return of those refugees eventually to their homes, which is where a number of them do want to go back to.
Yeah, I think what our deepest concern is that these people who have been so violently displaced are not committed to a lifetime of dependency and generations in a camp setting. And I just wanted to refer to the 2016 New York Declaration and the commitments of the Leaders' Summit on Refugees last year, and the principles that were highlighted there of the importance of enhancing access to education and livelihoods, recognising expanding access to resettlement and self-sufficiency and resilience. And I think the situation in Bangladesh is an opportunity to work through that lens and consider those principles and be one step ahead, as we know that this is likely to be a long-term situation.
Ian, do you want to comment on the longer term?
Again, I would echo all that has been said. From our perspective, there is the immediate need, which is to give the shelter, protection, and those. But then it's also working with those in communities to find ways into which to build their capacity, give them opportunities, so that they can actually move forward. So it's not just sustaining the situation; it's stabilise it, build the capacity to move forward, give them skills training, other training that will help take them go beyond their current situation.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to touch specifically on one of the solutions that Bangladesh is proposing for the long-term settlement of refugees, and that is the settling of people on the island called Thingar Char, which I understand is actually quite recent in terms of emerging as an island from silt off the Bangladeshi coast, and it's 2 hours by boat from the nearest settlement. What problems do you see regarding this, and is this really an ideal solution? And what has been the criticisms that have come from that?
Daphne, do you want to?
Yes, so we don't see it to be an ideal solution because of it being an inappropriate point. What we do see as an opportunity and a role for the Bangladeshi government is, given that the capacity on the ground in Cox's Bazar is currently outstripped by the scale of the emergency, there is an opportunity for the Bangladeshi government to expedite the release of funds and the operation of international NGOs and NGOs to enhance and complement the role of Bangladeshi civil society organisations. Currently, there is a very lengthy bureaucratic process in place to operate directly and directly implement in Cox's Bazar. The IRC is not directly implementing. We are seeking registration at the moment, and so we are in the midst of this long drawn-out process for registration. once registered to operate in Bangladesh. There's still a number of hoops to jump through to directly implement in Cox's Bazar. There's permission to operate there, there's release of foreign funds. This is all very time consuming, and in the meantime we're not in a position to directly implement, and other INGOs are also in the same situation. So I think a more appropriate solution would be to increase the capacity, expertise and response in Cox's Bazar and expedite the process for that response.
I mean, the point I want to touch on, and thank you for your response, is that the Bangladeshi government said it's their decision to make and theirs alone, which kind of freezes out the international community, and it's hugely welcome what Bangladesh has been doing over the last months and years, in fact. So what more could the international community do to help to not only cooperate, but to assist, if it's to remain in Cox's Bazar, or if not, maybe an alternative solution elsewhere?
Matthew, you want to...
Well, just going back briefly to the question about the island, this is not something that I think we've been seriously engaging with. I know there were various reports about it, but I don't think we're at the point where this is actually something that's going to materialise anytime soon. And there are, at the same time, also significant challenges within the existing settlements. As you'll know, Kutupalong extension is now over 400,000 people, and there was sort of speculation previously that this might actually expand to 800,000 people. This is something that we would be extremely wary of because of all of those issues that will go with the creation of such a mega site, the social issues, the environmental issues, the issues around crowding and sanitation. So we're hopeful that it won't have to come to the point where we do where this site actually has to extend to that kind of size, but we'll just have to see in terms of the numbers coming in the weeks and months ahead. In terms of what we can do to support the Bangladeshi government, obviously we are already working with them closely on infrastructure, so we're giving them money to help build roads, which the army actually, I understand, is actually taking care of. We are also sort of spending money on infrastructure in terms of lighting, and it's also clear that the refugee influx is having a huge impact on the local population. We've seen early evidence that social indicators are actually declining in terms of prices are going up, inflation has risen, education is being affected, local hospitals are being affected. So what we're trying to do is to invest money into those local structures, government structures. For example, in the local hospital in Cox's Bazar, we've been adding funds and staff so that that hospital can stay open later than it usually would to help cope with the knock-on impact that that's had on local people. And this is very much the model that we've been trying to look at for different refugee situations. For example, in Lebanon and in Jordan, where we've been trying to fund the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health. And of course, it's very early days in this crisis to be setting up proper structures to be doing that. But I think as this continues, that's the kind of thing that we will be doing to try and support the government and the local people of Bangladesh, of course, whom we thank very much for opening their doors and their hearts to the Rohingya population.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Chris. Lloyd.
You've mentioned previously, Ian and others, about the huge amounts of children arriving in the camps, and particularly unaccompanied children in the camp. What structures particularly are being put in place to support them, and are there particular things that the community needs to ensure that they're not trafficked? We heard about that earlier, and abused in particular.
Okay. I think one of the key areas is trying to make sure that the children stay within a kind of community environment. There has been some discussion about the Bangladesh government setting up a village type situation for the unaccompanied children, and so that would give them a space for education as well. However, from our perspective, we feel it's much more important that they stay within the community, in the community/family kind of structure. So, again, for ourselves, we really want to set up what we call child-friendly spaces, and we also want to set up for women, adolescents, and young children space, which is a key opportunity for us to engage with them, to talk with them, to learn why what has happened, what traumas they've faced, allow them that space to talk about it. It allows us to work together with women and children on nutrition and health, to give them some support on ways that they may be better to protect themselves within the camp situation. So for us, this is key that we have those spaces where we can work directly with them, and that information then can be fed into further situations. One of the key areas which we are also monitoring is child marriage, because again we are aware that there's been an increase in child marriages taking place, and so there is a concern that this is another sort of mechanism for children's abuse. So you have forced marriages, so people are selling the children for income or see it maybe as a way for the child to get out of that situation, not realising they're going into even worse. So that is an area that we feel needs to be monitored very closely.
Who's best to coordinate that at work? Is that international NGOs? Is it a UN agency? Is it
It's all coordinated together through the UN agencies. Mm-hmm. One of the key things is to make sure that we are actually reaching the most vulnerable and we're not duplicating work, and the mechanism through the UN agencies helps to ensure this is taking place. One of the key things for us at the moment as World Vision is we are actually able to work in the camps, but we would really welcome more open access for other NGOs. That is a big problem at the moment. Yes, it's happening, but it's a very slow process.
In terms of the UN agencies, is that then IOM that then lead on having to coordinate things like the safeguarding of children, or does UNICEF step in there? So who has the speciality to make sure?
The speciality for the protection element of the relief is with UNHCR. Mm-hmm. UNICEF would be a partner certainly on the children, the child area, mm-hmm. Underneath IOM's overall coordination. And so the approach so far is first focused on counting, as I mentioned, and so far we've identified almost 25,000 unaccompanied and separated children, and the expectation is that that number could well double by the end of the counting process, assuming an overall refugee population of 900,000. And as mentioned, the focus, once you've got the data, is to create child-friendly spaces to try and obviously get unaccompanied children back to their parents if possible. And we have several projects with Relief International and Save the Children, and also local NGOs where we're trying to do that. And where that's not possible, try to arrange for foster care. And then also, as mentioned, to create as many child-friendly, safe spaces that are open for a long period as you can, so that the children can at least have one area, one place where they can go and feel a relative amount of safety, and get provided with psychosocial support if that's needed as a result of the trauma that they've been through. And then, of course, also education, so putting resources into education. And education, as you'll all be aware, is often one area of a humanitarian crisis that is very much, in the early days, put on the back burner. And we've been trying to advocate for a long time now to make education spending much more integral to initial phases of crisis response, and to make sure that it's something that's focused on from the very beginning. And the education needs are absolutely huge. But just to reinforce what Ian said, the risks here are huge. They are labour, so child labour, so children going off and working, spreading out into the local community and being exploited, doing unpaid work, trafficking, early marriage, prostitution, and general abuse of children.
anticipated the next question, but I'll still ask Ivan to put the question.
There's not much to add. I mean, I think on the question of education, I suppose it would be useful to know who has lead responsibility for ensuring that children have access to that education. Is it clear where lead responsibility for that lies?
The education lead is, I believe, is UNICEF. I'd have to double check that with you. The co-lead is Save the Children. I mean, so UNICEF and Save the Children, I think, are leading on education.
Okay. We heard from the first panel, frankly, harrowing evidence about mass rape and the use of sexual violence as part of the situation. Two questions, really. One is, what is being done in the camps to give support to women and girls who've experienced rape and sexual violence, but also what is being done to protect them from assault in the camps? Daphne, do you want to...
Yes, that's of deep concern to the IRC, given the trauma that women and girls have experienced, both in their journey but also in the violence that took place before they left Myanmar. What is being done in the camps is it's essential that services are delivered appropriately and in line with international standards with regards to both GBV services and the child protection services. And in our multi-sector needs assessment, we were concerned about inappropriate services for GBV. That would include male members of staff, very visible centres for GBV. There's a real risk and a real fear amongst survivors of the risk of stigma, of recounting very traumatic incidents that increase the trauma. And so the services have to be delivered appropriately, and they're very technical. Equally, we're concerned that there's appropriate clinical response to rape. And so IRC is set to deliver a comprehensive women's centre. We're working with partners ActionAid and Relief International, ACF, on women-friendly safe spaces, much like the spaces that you heard, where they can access multiple services, both in terms of rape response, but also be around other women and be in a space where they can feel safe and have some return to normal life.
And do you have the funding in place to do that? Is that something that might be set up soon? Or
that's something we're awaiting registration to implement. In the meantime, we're giving technical support to our counterparts who are already operating and implementing directly, and sort of making the tools that are available, the international standards, context-specific to the situation in Cox's Bazar. I just wanted to add that 45% of the women attending these women-friendly safe spaces have reported GBV, and we've estimated 75,000 in need of GBV support. So the scale of this crisis is huge, and as you can imagine, the need is very, very urgent for people who've experienced such devastating trauma.
Thank you. Ian, do you want to add anything?
I think in all this, I think there is one other element which, again, is a bit of a challenge, is language. Again, to really give that support that is needed, it really needs to be in their own mother tongue language. We try expressing some things in another language, you don't get the intensity of that. You're not always able to express it the way that you really want to. So this is one of the challenges that I think we're facing in this situation, is yes, get the right support, but also, where at all possible, have people who can give that support in a language which really speaks to them, that they can really relate to, that really reaches into the essence of what has happened.
And is the solution to train the people who speak the language to have the skills to give the support, or is it also to train the people who've already got the skills to give the support to speak the language? I suppose a mixture of the two.
The first one is easier.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Matthew, final word
just very briefly, so I think it's an area that has to be tackled on a number of fronts. Part of it is, of course, improving the infrastructure around the camps, putting in better roads, better lighting, separating out washing and latrine facilities, which is something that I think is a focus at the moment, and ensuring these safe spaces for women and children as well. Part of it is also awareness raising with the refugee population, but also with the army and the police, and there are some programs afoot to try to address that. Recruiting more female staff, that's something we have been focusing on among the local and volunteer staff in particular, but also among all of the staff. And also, obviously, assuring that refugees themselves are aware of services and how they can access them. And we know that that's been an issue that has come up. It's just the information provision, telling refugees, informing them on where exactly they can go for a certain level of support. There's a few figures you may be interested in terms of GBV services and incidents so far. So, according to the latest situation report, 70,000 people, including 69,000 women, have been reached with GBV services, including case management, psychosocial support, dignity kits, community outreach, and awareness-raising activities. A cumulative total of 2,000 GBV incidents have been reported to date, and these include sexual forms of violence. 75% of survivors reporting gender-based violence in the last week had received emergency medical referral and support. So people who are coming forward and where this is being found out are being referred on, but I think the problem is bigger than just those who are coming forward, obviously.
Well, look, thank you very much indeed, and that brings the second panel's evidence to a close. I'm immensely grateful to the three of you, and really to put on record on behalf of the whole committee our appreciation of the work that your organisations and others are doing in what is such a truly challenging and in many ways horrendous situation. But thank you. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding